Welcome everyone. Today I have another guest. He is Mr. David Schumacher, and he is a very experienced guy. He has a strong views about technology. He has very good like involvement with the modern politics, and he is trying to explore the world with his experience, and he try to guide young peoples. So hopefully it will be a very interesting session. Hello, Mr. David. How are you?
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on. I greatly appreciate being here, and I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Yes. Sir, can you please introduce yourself with our audience? I know you have a very interesting background. So can you please share with our audience, please?
Yeah, well, thank you. Um, Hi, I'm David, and I am a member of the United States Transhumanist Party, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on this morning. My job there is Director of Applied Innovations. And one of the reasons that that's my job there is I have this passion towards technology, which I've had for many years. And I love technology. I love looking forward to the future. And I love applying that technology and making it useful in people's everyday lives. And I found that to be quite an advantage, both in my professional career and help to my community and to those that I work with. Now, as far as additional introduction, I already mentioned that I am a technologist. I consider myself a futurist. I love to look at what is coming. I'm an explorer. I'll go seek out what is coming. I'm also a cryonicist, and we can talk a little bit about that at some point. That may be something that your viewers are may or may not be familiar with. Professionally, these days, I do a couple of things where I spend the most of my time outside the Transhumanist Party. Is I have a small company where I do tutoring, coaching, training, and instructing, and I've done that for Fortune 500 companies here in the United States. And these days, mostly I like to work with individuals that want to put themselves together to forward as far as their skills.
Yes. Sir, like you have a transhumanist concept. And at present world, we are facing with COVID-19 and this kind of things. How you can make a relations like this transhuman concept and COVID-19 solution?
Well, COVID-19, of course, is a problem worldwide. And here in the United States, some of our 50 states are doing better than the other. I live in the state of Arizona, and it is one of the 4 states that right now, where we're at, is exhibiting a high number of cases each day, and unfortunately, a high number of deaths each day. Right now, yesterday, or recently, last reported, we had over 3,300 new cases in one day here just in the state that I live in. And we had close to 80 deaths from COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a very pervasive problem. And a lot of it, as far as transhumanist solution goes, I think it starts with the basics that we've heard from all of our major scientific advice givers on this, which is sanitation, washing, cleaning your hands, maintaining physical separation, and the use of face masks. Now, from a transhumanist standpoint, much of that is very low tech. The high-tech solution, of course, would be a vaccine, which people are working on. And then I think looking forward, not anticipating is probably a better word, anticipating that COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic that the world will see. I think where transhumanism can come to play is looking for what do we do going into the future to see that we can minimize our aspect as human beings to COVID-19 itself. By the way, I see my camera fluctuating. It's a problem that just started this morning, and I do apologize for that. But anyway, it starts with the basics. I think that's something, reading the numbers that I've seen from Malaysia seems to be my impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Malaysia seems to be following the guidelines from health professionals and doing quite well, especially by comparison to Arizona. And I would say that here in the Wild West of the United States, there are many people that don't like to follow rules and don't like to be told what to do. And I think that also contributes to the problem that we have here.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you for your comments and other things. But example, let's say Malaysia and the Asia Pacific, let's say Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, many countries still they are developing nation. They are trying to develop their economy and other things. Like what the interesting things we can learn in that situations in COVID-19 from your technological aspect? What type of new technology USA right now they are invented, and which is important for this kind of developing nations and this economy?
Yeah, sure. There are plenty of good examples all around us. And some of the technology has been here for a while and is in the process of being perfected. My partner, Susan, she actually works for public health in this country. And prior to COVID-19, she would go into the office every day and spend her time working. And occasionally she would have a laptop and work from home. However, working at home now, she's been doing that every day since about the third week of March of this year. So having their IT infrastructure at a place where they could absorb more online workers, and her actually learning to work from home, learning to work from a virtual private network into, in her case, she works for a county government's health organization and work with that. But going beyond that, being able to do meetings, being able to restructure things that she used to have to do physically to be able to do them remotely, and to be able to learn how to do that and work with that well. Now, I'm using her as an example, but we're seeing that in a lot of businesses that are capable of working from home. For example, even the tutoring business that I do now is done solely online. I won't meet with students one-on-one. So that's a technology. This opens up people, once they get over that initial hurdle of I need to do something different, I need to work with a technology that I may not be all that familiar with. I think it opens them up to the idea that technology can help them, because for people that have been able to transition to a work at home environment, or a schooling at home environment, or a shopping at home environment, is going to change things coming out the other side for COVID-19. We shop for groceries, we shop for most everything online and have it delivered to our doorstep. With COVID-19 being so rampant here, we want to apply the available technology that we can right now. I think the challenge going forward is looking for the people that do not have jobs that allow themselves to social distance and work from home. Looking for solutions that can help with those is of paramount importance. And as I think of some, I think some of those are going to be very, very challenging. I mean, for example, the people that are bringing me all these packages that I shop for online, or people that need to do casework and seeing people face to face. So perhaps there are technologies, perhaps there are better respirator systems, perhaps, as we've seen in grocery stores and shopping, We use low-tech solutions like just setting up a physical barrier, a plexiglass barrier between people so that you can still have a face-to-face connection if you need to go into an office, but you're not exposed, something along that line. But I do think it is an opportunity to have people say, let's focus on the problem that we have in front of us now. Let's apply the innovation that we have in front of us now. And can we raise our sights to look for innovations that are maybe further down the road that may not be practical today, but can we dream about them? Can we put funding into them to allow us to go forward into the 21st century? I'll give you an example. I was talking with a person that's running for the United States Congress, would be my representative to the United States Congress. Now, she's not with the Transhumanist Party, she's with another party, but she too is a technologist. And we talk about things such as online voting. Now, with COVID-19 going on, there's a big push in this country, especially by one of the major parties, to have people vote by mail. Vote by mail is a technology that's been around for a long time, but it does require more resources to do it on the scale that we would probably like to see to make sure that everyone is represented in the upcoming election. With people gravitating towards online banking, with people gravitating towards online working and shopping, online voting seems to be a natural extension of that. But there are many issues that need to be resolved. We can look to countries like Estonia, which has the first online economy, and see how that would work in Arizona, see how that would work in the United States. And perhaps there's an application for it to work in Malaysia. But you can see that the more that people can do online, when we are confronted with any kind of a situation that requires us to stay home, whether that be a pandemic, whether it be social unrest, whatever it might be, investing in those long-term technologies that allow us to do that is an area that I'm interested in trying to get people to look at.
Yes, sir. One specific things I just want to know, like from USA, especially from Silicon Valley and different places, we find many visionary projects for energy, for water, for constructions, everything, even for aerospace, spaceships, many interesting things. We find that you are inventing or corporations are inventing. My question is that, let's say I'm representing developing economy, and in the practical fields when I work, I find that many of the things still not possible to implement because of environment, economical aspect, local demand. Okay, let's example like if we introduce AI, maybe many people will lose their jobs. This is also a not only economical challenge, it's also a political challenge as well. So when you invent the technology and you introduce it with the developing nations, look, how do you do your feasibility study? What's the perception? Do you do a real-time research and something, or it's actually too much of visionary project?
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's how you would implement disruptive technologies like something like AI.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it would be great to do that in a very thoughtful and procedural sort of way. That has not been my experience, though. As we've seen disruptive technologies come on in the United States in the past, whether it be something like ride sharing that's impacted the cab industry, or whether it be other disruptive technologies, they've appeared on the scene. They have been resisted by the status quo, if you will. For example, let's use taxi cabs and ride sharing. So ride sharing started, I think, as a novelty. And as it started to grow and take business from the cab companies, my impression is that the cab companies didn't seek to emulate or even to absorb ride sharing, but to fight it. And many times fighting that is done from a legal and political standpoint, trying to work with people that are already in power, that perhaps have an investment in the status quo, and convince them that the status quo needs to be maintained. So let's ban ride sharing from profitable places like airport and hotel pickups and drop offs and things of that nature. Public demand for it, however, made ride sharing push through, and eventually we see cab companies with websites and apps and things that are very ride sharing centric. And we also see regulation then coming to ride sharing that looks more like what we see with the cab companies. So if we extrapolate that out into other areas of new technology, I would love to see it done differently. I would love to see it say, hey, we have this new technology. How do we integrate it? How do we step it through? That would be one of the things that I would advocate for with the Transhumanist Party. And one of the reasons that I am out there talking with people that are already in elected office and people that wish to be into elected office, trying to show them that there's a better way to integrate this. So if we go back to something like AI, which artificial general intelligence will probably be the most disruptive technology that we have ever seen, should it come to pass, which I believe it will, and I think it will probably be sooner than later. So what do we do about that? If we do it with the current model that we have, which means a disruption comes along and then we react to it, we'll find ourselves in this country, the United States, with people looking at it as any other emergency that comes along, trying to handle it from an emergency perspective, and we'll eventually get a handle on it. But it won't be the smooth transition that it could have been. So I look to support things like we had a presidential candidate during our primary season here, someone who you may be familiar with if you follow US politics. His name is Andrew Yang, and he's from the American Democratic Party. And he was in support. Part of his campaign platform was a $1,000 US per month per individual universal basic income. And he was talking specifically about the disruption of technology coming from driverless vehicles, especially an example that he loved to use was the trucking industry. Here in the United States, big country, so rail and trucks, especially trucks, bring a lot of products from one place to the other. It's an essential part of the supply line here in this country. And it employs a great number of people in trucking that have been doing that for years, decades, maybe generations. We've already had now a few trials of trucks driving interstate freeways here, maybe with a pilot driver on board, and reportedly some that didn't even have that to be able to move goods and services by trucks from one place to another. That would be a huge disruption. And it's a disruption that I think hits the common person. It's the common person that's a truck driver. It allows them to see what a technology like that, how that can impact their jobs. Certainly it will impact other jobs where the common people are at. I'm a common person. I expect to see it affect the kind of work that I do as well, and more automation is becoming a part of the work that I do as well. It's not inconceivable to see that going for a long time, and being able to eventually take over most, if not all of it. So I think universal basic income would be something that would be a program to be put in place, whether it be for the long term or whether it be a short-term solution as we look at how do people see themselves in a world where most, if not all, of the work is done by artificial intelligence, done by technology.
Yes, sir. I have one specific question to you. Uh, like, as you have philosophically, you have one idea about politics, U.S. politics, and these things. But in present world, we see some of the challenge in between USA and China, and some of the economical unstable situation we are facing, many challenges we are facing. So, what will be the future of US and China relation?
Well, I wish I had the crystal ball to tell you that. I know what I
Okay.
would like to see. I would like to see a collaboration between the United States and China.
Mhm.
I think that there exists a history of that of the last few decades or so where China has grown their manufacturing capability, some say at the expense of the environment and so forth. But I would like to see uh, perhaps things that we have learned here, say from the environment, and being able to help China with that. And China, their work not only in manufacturing, but also in space exploration and satellite technology and so forth. I would love to see a collaboration versus a competition. Now, that may be a little too optimistic. There certainly seems to be nationalist tendencies on both sides to want to maintain a certain balance that's there. And uh, I'm not really sure how we get around that other than doing the sort of things that we're doing this morning. People in different countries talking to each other, sharing ideas, and once again, having the local citizenry uh, have an impact on how we change. When I talked about disruptive technologies, I said that the status quo wanted to maintain the status quo, of course, those invested in the status quo. But it was people driving the adoption of ride sharing that made cooperation, if you want to call it that, happen between cab companies and ride sharing, and for there to be an adaptation of policies. Perhaps, well, if we take that out to a much greater scale, the politics between countries, that sort of thing will happen as well. I say, reach out, make friends yourself all across this globe. If I'm talking to United States citizens, I say, don't be afraid to talk to Chinese citizens and vice versa. And let's try a grassroots hands across the water concept. And maybe we can have our governments follow along with us.
Yes, this is interesting. And besides that, like in COVID situation, all economy going shut down. Many corporations actually struggle with business. Many things happening. What is the future of globalization? What do you think?
Well, that's another very, very good question. Right now in the United States, our dominant political party seems to be pushing away from globalization. This is my opinion. It seems like the leader of that party's slogan is "Make America Great Again," and seems to be turned in on itself. I think that once again, the people of the different countries see it differently, or maybe that's just my viewpoint that I'm projecting on them. But I think that we need uh, this amalgamation of cultures. We need this amalgamation of knowledge that comes from all over the world. And I think that in the long run, our governments need to see that as well. Some of my recent readings suggest that perhaps, how do I want to say it, economic interests in specific areas will continue to collaborate worldwide, whether that be in raw materials, whether that be in products for stores, whatever that may be, that we may end up bypassing governments that want to be parochial, and that the interests of companies and businesses will need to be wider spread. Now, you mentioned about COVID-19. We can see how COVID-19 can shut down borders and so forth, but it doesn't necessarily have to shut down things that are automated. So as we look to the future, we've been talking about automated vehicles. Perhaps we can look forward to the future where we have automated technology such as automated airplanes, so that we don't have to worry about spreading a COVID disease by having humans fly things from one country to another, but we have the airplanes capable of doing that. Or maybe we have other technologies that allow us to be able to move goods and services very quickly, perhaps across land masses. Maybe it's high-speed trains, transportation, things of that nature. But we definitely need to be on the lookout for technologies that can support us in that area. And by the way, that keeps people engaged in technology, because we're the ones that need to be able to satisfy a human condition. I'm not sure how good AI will be at being able to do that. Perhaps a perfect AI would be able to understand us so well that it could try to figure out these things for us. But I think there is a human element for some time to come in this. So while we will have jobs that will go away, as we've had in every major type of situation, say like in the Industrial Revolution, many jobs changed suddenly. I think we'll have job changes that will come about that from AI. And the job changes that can still be there after AI enters the scene will be things that I think are very human-centric, where humans can put the touch on, at least the final touch, that perhaps AI can't do. So there's a couple of different answers there.
Yes. So one specific problems we are observing right now, as well as many people asking question on that particular point. Let's say many people losing their job in COVID-19 period. Many people. And next 2-3 years will be many more challenging for economy and these things. So as you are thinking and working with technology, many people losing job in these economical situations, how this technology and these new entrepreneurial initiatives can solve these economical challenges for next 3 years.
Sure, and in the end, it's always people that solve the challenges. Technology is a tool that we can use to help get there, but it is people. So I think perhaps people in the industries where the jobs are at risk because of COVID-19 can be the biggest resource for how to apply technologies going forward. I have a daughter that lives in another state, the state of Nevada, and she's worked in 2 industries since she graduated from university. She's worked in the theater industry, and she's worked in food service industry. Both of those have been heavily impacted by COVID-19. Now, the theater industry requires a lot of people on stage, and technology there typically has been a behind-the-scenes approach to helping live theater shows go on. I think that those people that are working in the theaters are the ones that can look forward. They can look at what the specific issues are to communicable disease, and look at ideas beyond what's the current convention of spreading people out and wearing face masks and so forth, and look to say, how do we bring large groups of people together to do these shows, whether that's a mixture of some type of online video technology, whether that's augmented reality, whether that's introducing virtual reality into the live theater market. I'm not quite sure, but those would be discussions that I would love to have. Now, the other industry that she's involved with has been the food service industry, and that's very much a people industry. I mean, we all eat at home. We all do our own cooking to some degree. But I myself very much enjoy going out to a restaurant. And a great part of that is the socialization, going out to where there's an atmosphere where people come to my table and talk to me and make suggestions. And it's a very personal thing. So many restaurants in Nevada now have been closed except for takeout orders, orders to go, things of that nature now for a while. So there's been a large number of people that have lost jobs. So what does the restaurant industry do to be able to bring the personal aspect to invite people in? You know, is that better air filtration systems? They have some degree of expertise in that because kitchens and so forth need to have that to be able to trap contaminants. Maybe there's a better way for air filtration. Maybe there's a means of being able to not only clean tables, but to have tables that are better suited to maintaining a non-contagious environment. But in the near term, things like government aid programs, going back to Andrew Yang's UBI, these would be things that would help in the meantime as we look to potential technological solutions from the people that know the situation the best. I think we have to apply that in each one of those areas.
Yes. So very interesting. Like one thing, let's say in Asia Pacific, there are 57% youth. Many youth actually, those who are under 30. So what do you think, like their future? What do you think about their futures? How they can grow themselves? What your advice? How they can integrate it with the more technological skills? Most important thing is that how they can develop their ethical perceptions.
Preparing for the future is always, well, it's what I like to look at, but many people don't. So I think maybe the first thing would be to have people not look at the past. What kind of jobs do I prepare for based on what my family has done in the past or from what I've seen in the past? But I would start with, what are my interests now? And I'm speaking from myself if I was in that position of, say, a 20-year-old today, and saying, how do I prepare for this future? And I would say, where does it look like the future needs to go? Now, online searches can help in that regard. I would say engaging in discussions in groups that are interested in the future. The Transhumanist Party that I'm a part of, we put on what we call an enlightenment salon every week now, and it's on Sunday, 1 p.m. Pacific time. That's United States time, of course. And we talk about these things. We talk about what is coming for us, how could things possibly be changed, and we invite guests that will give us an idea. So for an example, tomorrow, we will be talking to David Hanson from Hanson Robotics. And if you're not familiar with him, then you probably are familiar with Sophia the robot. I hope Sophia is on the show with us as well. But talking with David, perhaps talking with Sophia, gives people an idea of what the robotic future looks like. Perhaps an interest in robotics, perhaps an interest in being able to design and implement or sell or market or the various aspects of robotic technologies coming along. perhaps that is where we need to go. We've had people on that have talked about the space industry. There is much going on with the space industry, not only in the United States, but in other states as well. Maybe this is an area that a young person would want to invest in for themselves. And there's all types of support industries for the space industry. There is fuel, there's logistics, there are a myriad of things. There's the electronics to support them. These would be things that I would investigate looking forward and saying, how can I be involved in these? Having said that, I would also say, be flexible. Because what we're looking forward to now, maybe we can see what the future looks like with some degree of accuracy for the next year to 5 years. But past that can be pretty difficult. Be flexible that if you start preparing to work, say, with robotics, that you may need to take that in a different direction at one time. I remember my parents, but primarily my grandparents' generation. My grandfather had one job his entire life. He was a carpenter. That's what he did. And there was no thought of him ever doing anything else. My father had a couple of different jobs as things have changed. I've been a technologist for a few decades now. And while I have stayed in the technology field, that technology has changed drastically. I started in technology with the United States Air Force, and I'll give you a clue as to my age. I started with them back in the 1970s. And in the 1970s, when I started with them, I went to an electronics school, and I had been fascinated with electronics. And the electronics was all about vacuum tube technology. They taught us how individual circuits work. They taught us about soldering and unsoldering components of resistors and capacitors, and that we would troubleshoot to that level. As time went on, electronics became digital, and then electronics became computerized. And then computerization, pardon me, at least from my viewpoint, dominated electronics, and I made the shift to follow the computer path. And I followed that, and then that became, it went from initially being computerization buried in industrial products to general computerization of the individual personal computer. And then it went to networked personal computers. And now we're networking all around the globe. So I think you can see the contrast from my grandfather's generation to my father's generation to my generation. I expect my children's generation to have even many more twists and turns as technology shapes and we as people shape it to our advantage as we move forward into the future. So back to your specific question, what do I advise people to do that are starting in the industry? Look forward, find a place that interests you and plug into that, and then be adaptable. Continue to look forward because your future will change in exciting ways. This can be a very good thing that we're talking about moving forward.
Yes. So one thing in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, like there are a lot more innovation coming, lot more technology coming, many opportunities may coming. Also, challenging situation we are overcoming from this situation. But what the valuable aspect we should grow, and you don't think like even in this COVID-19 period, what we see in different state, even in countries, let's say even USA and even different country, even South Asia, many countries we see corruptions, people is not satisfied, healthcare system is not good, industry cannot survive. What does it mean? What are the indicators? Like the world is not in right track, or what do you think?
Well, the world is certainly in a period of change, and the world has always been in a period of change. I think that change is accelerating. And myself, and I think as I observe others, we always tend to see the negative aspect of something before we can see the positive aspect of it. So what I try to remind myself to do when I look and say, things are not to my satisfaction, how can I take advantage of that to bring about the kind of change that I want, number one, and how can I do that to bring, to benefit myself and to benefit those that are around me? Because change that doesn't benefit people isn't the kind of change that I want. So is the world on the right track? The world is on the track that is constantly in self-adjustment. I think that when we see things that we might not consider to be the right track, we may be more motivated to do something about it. I think there becomes a series of complacency when things are just going along nice and no one is being disrupted, but then we're not really seeing change. That reminds me of the days of some of the big monopolies that we had in the United States. Our telephone system in the United States was a monopoly, a legal monopoly for a very long time. And when antitrust broke that monopoly up into smaller companies, they went into competition against each other and products that eventually led to being able to connect this to the internet, technologies that eventually ended up being cell phones and so forth came about. But prior to that, communication technology, there wasn't a driver to really try to make it better. So we need a spirit of cooperation, but we also need a spirit of competition to be able to drive us forward. We, as humans, need to feel that something needs to be changed. Perhaps something's wrong. Perhaps something's not on the right track. And maybe that's what can help us improve things such as healthcare systems. We can look and see where healthcare systems have been stressed by COVID-19 and look to see what can be done about that. And these then are opportunities not only to make the world better, but they can be economic opportunities for yourself and for myself. So let's look at where we can plug ourselves into the kind of change that we want. And then talk about the positives of how we can drive this forward. So let me try to give you an example. What comes to mind on healthcare systems, I think in the United States, there is much that can be done to fix the healthcare system. I'm not a fan of its current method of being able to do that. It's very segmented. It's very heavily steeped in competition and not so much in cooperation. So what can I do as a person to help with cooperation from a technological standpoint? I support electronic medical records, for example, so that competition and cooperation can both be enhanced. The past model was a paper medical record, and then there was an online proprietary medical record. But here in the United States, if I went from one healthcare provider to another, I had to start from the very beginning and give them all that information again. So I'm pushing for, and we're starting to see, means where we have central healthcare records that can be shared with the appropriate safeguards between my medical service providers, so that medical service providers can still compete, yet I can provide information that's important about me to both of them from some central place. Not only that, as doctors from different health services provide me care, they input this back into the medical records, and it provides a form of cooperation to the other medical providers that I'm using. So this is, I think, a tangible example of where I can make this better going forward by the use of technology.
Sir, besides that, we have problem with the carbon emissions, global warming. We have a great problem. We do not have enough drinking waters. We have problem with like environment pollutions. Job creations is a challenging right now. And by this time, we move with this COVID-19. But in a long-term basis, what should be the politicians' responsibility for solve this kind of problem? All of the problem actually, I think, need more time to solve these things. But what happened? The global politics.
Well, there is the global politics, and clearly something like global warming is a global issue. However, I think that you asked what the politician's responsibility is. From my viewpoint, the politician's responsibility is to listen to their constituents. Now, each one of the constituents has a stake in this. I have a stake in global warming sitting here in Arizona, and you do as well in Malaysia. So we both need to work with our local politicians. There's a saying that all politics is local. And it starts out at that, and it starts out at this local level. Meet and talk with your political representatives and encourage them. Also, if you can, work with local businesses that would have input into this, because they too will also be meeting and talking to their politicians as well. I think that in so many of these cases, the answers to these things are yes, from a political standpoint, but that politics starts with each and every one of us having the conversation and keeping it in the forefront of people's minds. So, for example, we have a dichotomy in this country. Our dominant political party seems to downplay the effects of global warming. Yet we have companies that are responsive to the markets, to the people that they sell their products to, that are speaking out for global warming. So we have major corporations that are committing to a plan of being carbon neutral by a certain specific date. They're doing that not because the government in the United States is forcing them to do that. They're doing that because the constituency of the politicians, the people that buy the products of these corporations, are being very vocal about what's going on. So it's always a multi-pronged approach. First, start with yourself and say, what can I do individually about this? And I think a part of that is being political, is talking to the political parties, talking to your political representatives, talking to making your voice heard among the places where you shop, go to school, do business. And this will bubble up to a global response. I would love to see this bubble up so much that we forget that it started at the local level, that we have governments participating, as some do, but that we have all of them participating and not trying to deny situations, but really need to look towards how this can be solved. But I hope I answered your question by saying it really starts with people being disruptive, favoring the businesses that are favoring the kind of outcomes that we all need to see for our future and for the future of future people on this planet.
Yes. Sir, one thing, like, as you are mentioning that we need to be more responsible, politicians need to be more responsible, and they have to follow the constitution. So my question is that how we can do better policy for their nations, how they can, what area they should focus for developing policy.
Politicians will focus where the noise is the loudest. So what matters the most to us, but I think also what matters the most to people that are seeing this from a scientific, technological, engineering viewpoint. I think that while technology, uh, uh, the industries that spring up from technology can be some of the polluters of the planet, for example, like we've seen, I think in China, where we've seen where great factories have been built and uh, the environment has taken a backseat maybe to the economic uh, concerns. I think there are other businesses that can start up that can focus on that as well. And this would be one area where I would love to see global cooperation. Countries that have technologies that can help alleviate, say, environmental pollutions, whether that be uh, uh, using different types of agents that are less environmentally polluting, maybe companies that have made a business of doing environmental cleanup, maybe companies that specialize in uh, analyzing environmental situations. There can be money made from both sides. So, to go back to your question, where do we focus first? I think we need to focus on the things that can give us, that would impact us negatively for the longest period of time. To me, global warming clearly is one of those. So, how we get there, that's a tough decision, especially from this country's standpoint. But I think it goes back to what I was talking about putting pressure on politicians for what impacts each one of us citizens the most. But we need to have a conversation that draws us into the long term. I'm struggling a little bit because global warming response from the United States is not what I would hope it to be. I can't look and say, here's what my country is doing to make this better, but I can look and say that I see corporations that are moving in the right direction. Perhaps that's an answer to some of your question, because if industries grow up to be able to mitigate, to be able to employ people into positions that can be used to positively improve the nature of the economy, then that is something that would get citizen support that would then get political focus.
Yes. Sir, I have my last questions to you. Uh, my last question is that, like, okay, we can understand everything is moving forward and many things happening. Specifically, what your thought, like when we want to build up better global ecosystems based on technology, based on youth, based on futures, how you want to advise the global community that how we can make better global citizenship in these present situations.
Yes, global citizenship, I think, is framed by global issues. So some of the issues that have been global that we haven't dealt with so well have been things like COVID-19 and global warming. Perhaps as a transhumanist, as a futurist, what I would like to see would be for us to focus on things that perhaps don't have so much status quo built into them. Perhaps there are things that we can uh, focus on globally and build a common future forward together. One of my favorite ones to look at there would be a future in space. So we have an international space station. I think that is definitely a step in the right direction. So we have nations that work together well in that aspect. I love going up in the night sky. We have many clear nights here in Phoenix, and I can see the International Space Station, a bright spot in the sky, streak across, and I can look up there and say, there are people on that. That's something that gives me a sense of excitement. And any place in the world that has clear skies can do that as well. So that's near Earth orbit. So I love to see companies, not just governments, getting involved. So Elon Musk, for example, wants to put people on Mars by a certain date. And we have other companies that are looking at wanting to put people on the moon. And perhaps there's there clearly are economic aspects of doing both. So I'm thinking that from a global perspective, if we can focus on something that is good for humanity, where we don't have the status quo baggage, perhaps space is a good one of those, perhaps being able to establish moon colonies, perhaps being able to establish the laws, the governing system for how we internationally work in a common place like the moon and Mars, and perhaps do it differently than we did as humans expanded here on this globe and moved around. So I would encourage people to take a look at that. I would encourage, I find it hard not to be excited about that. As I like to, since I have the clear skies here, I can look up and see Mars. I can look up and we have had very good viewing of Jupiter and Saturn in the night sky here in Arizona recently. Even without a telescope, you can see their light. Both Jupiter and Saturn have planets that are potentially, not planets, they have moons that may possibly be able to be used for human life at some standpoint. I like to read science fiction. On our Enlightenment Salon last week, we had a transhumanist author that was writing about the future, and he was talking about such civilizations. Now, while that's fantasy today, it may not be fantasy forever. And I just imagine stepping outside, looking up in the sky and seeing Saturn and Jupiter and saying, I see that light, and there are people living around that light. That invokes a sense of globalism that I think that can really help and can drive people to the future. Let's continue to have these conversations, not only about solving today's problems, which I very much want to do, but let's look forward to the opportunities that can come to us tomorrow and be able to use that to shape a future of, yes, some competition, but also great cooperation, which I think is what's required in globalism.
Yes, thank you, sir, for your time. But before I finish the sessions, what your advice for youth?
My advice for youth is stay positive, stay engaged, look forward, and if you're especially in the United States, go to the U.S. Transhumanist Party's website, transhumanist-party.org, and read about what the Transhumanist Party is all about. Take a look at what our core values are. Look at the platform that is there and see if that excites you. See if that's something that wants to move you forward into the future. And go to the membership page, join up, come to our salons, talk to people, make the future what you want it to be.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. This is actually a very good discussion, especially techno-policy, technological aspects, and present challenging situations. Different aspect, we get a very good guidelines. So hopefully in the futures, we will do group discussions. And World Talent Economy Forum, we are trying to build up a better ecosystem. And by the ecosystem, we are trying to solve different local problem with the collaboration of international partners. So we want to welcome you, any of your idea, any of your advice, any of your like support will really, really helpful for us. And thank you for your valuable time, and thank you for your very good advice and your analysis.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciated being here, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.